Hello everyone, this is Max on the one, and today this is his failed history of slideboarding, a video game's feature slide that never really became popular to its full potential. We'll be looking at the full history starting from the very beginning. Slideboarding was first showed off at IAPA 2013. It was apparently inspired by an idea of one of the water park engineers at Whitewater West Sun touching joints of the water slide in order to, quote, earn points, unquote. This idea was ironically already done before by a few European water slide manufacturers, but this would be the first time a Western manufacturer would do such an idea. However, unlike those European slides and the kids' idea, this would be done in a much more safer format, via what was initially supposed to be a mat with buttons you would push. However, late into production, the idea was changed to a variation of the tube slide, just because, well, it's much easier to press buttons on a tube than it is on a mat when you're already trying to hold on to the mat at all costs. With a tube, you're more relaxed, so they changed it to a tube. And the next year, in 2014, the first ever slideboarding opened in Wet n Wild, Las Vegas. Cultus Lake Park in British Columbia would test the first slideboarding technology exclusively to Whitewater West employees. It was not finalized, and it's presumed that the only people who got to test it were, of course, employees of Whitewater West. It wasn't really a full setup, and it was merely just a prototype for promotional material, but it was a start. The first actual public installation would go to Wet n Wild Las Vegas in Nevada. This would be a retrofit of one of their pre-existing Zip Zap and Zoom water slides. This slide was already only a year or two old, along with the water park, so it made sense to use a relatively new slide to test out the slideboarding technology. The slide was a hit, resulting in the unveiling of the slideboarding takeover orchestrated by Whitewater West. The first would be an app on the App Store. This would be a simulation of slideboarding, where you're supposed to press the colored buttons at the right time. This app, well, is of course a simulation of many of the different layouts, so depending on what park you are, you can practice on your own park slideboarding, which was pretty nice. Great Wolf Lodge, a traditionally pro slide based chain, would actually buy two, technically three, installations of slideboarding for their Poconos and Williamsburg resorts respectively. This would be quite an undertaking, as this were slides done by Pro Slide, a different manufacturer, but nonetheless they managed to retrofit them, and the slides would reopen with slideboarding technology. Great Wolf Lodge's one of their rivals, Wilderness, would also get into the action with their Wisconsin Dells Resort retrofitting two of their slides with slideboarding, which was pretty successful at first. People liked it at first, and well, it was pretty successful at that resort as well, resulting in a whole lot more installations to come. Typhoon Texas Houston would get the first ever new build slideboarding as part of their tube slide complex, which opened with the park. This would be the black and red slide as part of their snake pit complex, or more exactly, this would be the slide nicknamed Diamondback. Not to be confused with the coaster of Kings Island, that's the same name. So, yeah, it also did fairly well at this park too. Warp Speed would be a retrofit of a couple of older Whitewater West or Pro Slide or maybe, I don't know, tube slides at Highland Hills Water World in Colorado. This would also be decently successful, although POV footage does show that this slide does, and all the others have one fatal flaw.
Please don't flag me for copyright. I don't have a choice, it's the song they chose. It's not license free.
Then, of course, there's the one at Water Zoo Water Park in Clinton, Oklahoma. This water park is relatively small when opened in 2013. It still is today. But it shows that even the smallest of water parks can afford slideboarding to retrofit one of their older slides, as shown here. Which was pretty nice of Whitewater to allow smaller parks to be able to retrofit their slides to slideboarding. 2019 would see a myriad of editions of slideboarding. The first one we're going to talk about is Calorie Sandusky, which refit their made in 2005 Whitewater West tube slides, Elephant Shrunk, and Wild Willoughbys, and the Storm Chaser, which is their name for slideboarding. These slides would also debut to pretty phenomenal success, with the slides getting even longer lines than they usually would. Not just due to slideboarding though, but also due to having the login thing, but they were still huge successes. Slideboarding would also make its grand foray to the Korean market that year, with the installation of the slideboarding slide at the new resort Daebyung Semchuk in South Korea, alongside the beach, which is pretty neat. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of information about this specific installation, mainly because it is in South Korea, so there's not a whole lot known about it, but from what I can gather, it is a slideboarding slide, of course. In addition, a couple of ships owned by MSC would be built with slideboarding slides. Those would be the first slideboarding slides at sea. So, it seems like smooth sailing for slideboarding. It's a really intrusive concept that garners a lot of guests and will follow following via its app and the slides themselves. But what could possibly go wrong for a high-touch, highly interactive experience where you're supposed to type your name on a screen via a touch screen and touch buttons as you go down the slide? Well,
They're all in the same water, all close together.
Ruth Uribe of Auburn dining across the street from Roseville's Sunsplash Water Park, listening to the kids screaming as they come down the slide.
I don't think it's fair. I think it's poor judgment.
From above, Livecopter 3 shows us about 75 people in the main pool, clearly not 6 feet apart from each other, and obviously none of them wearing masks. Groups of people were spotted leaving the park together, even some of their lifeguards. Security asked us to leave, so from across the street, we spotted long lines of kids crowding up the stairway to get to the top of the slides.
the COVID-19 pandemic would have an enormous impact on water parks, and not just water parks, but, literally everything. But in terms of water parks were around, some of them were around the reopened for the summer. But with social distancing and concerns about touching things, the water parks with slideboarding opted to turn off the slideboarding, seemingly temporarily. However, temporarily, it wouldn't turn out to be. Great Wolf Lodge would terminally turn off their slideboarding TV screens and disable the lights, reverting their slides back to their original name, Alberta Falls. Kalahari Sandusky would also turn off their slideboarding abilities and resort back to tubes, although the new name Storm Chaser stuck. Ironically, the water park that really got slideboarding going, Wetwall Las Vegas, faced problems because of impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic from its owner, Village Roadshow, based in Australia. They were looking to offload basically almost all of their non-Australian properties, and this included their wet and wild parks. Wetwall Las Vegas would be sold to a private equity firm, Cowabunga Bay, to be renamed to Cowabunga Canyon. So, and when that happened, the slideboarding was disabled and it was converted back to a normal tube slide. Even to this very day, many of the slideboarding slides would have their remnants of what once was, as the rigs were still shown on the outside of the slides, hitting at what was once a new water slide concept, now a thing, ironically, of the past. There are two, however, still known to be left in operation. First is World Water Park, which still has slideboarding but uses modified tubes with the slideboarding buttons. And then of course there's Water Zoo, which, while the details are exactly clear, it still seems to be in operation as their Facebook page still occasionally advertises slideboarding, and their website still has slideboarding listed. But wait, this isn't the end of the slideboarding story, as slideboarding has made somewhat of a comeback in the People's Republic of China.
Hello, my name is Shui Shui, and I need your help. I've traced a large amount of unexplained energy back to this very spot. We need your team to help us harness this energy by correctly ordering the colored energy bubbles as you move down the tunnel. You'll be armed with energy collectors at your seat position. Look down now and memorize the locations of each color. You will only have a short amount of time at each bubble to harness the energy.